I often make a point to my patients about the source of their feelings. Why are they feeling what they're feeling, and why does it have the character and the intensity that it has? And what I have to do is I have to point out to them the fact that they are rationalizing in a very logical way about the environment and how the environment is triggering these emotions. And so they'll say, I am worried about this. I feel this because XYZ happened. And even as we're having a discussion about their physical condition and their genetics and the medications they're taking and the symptoms that we're treating and things are changing, they will rationalize. Their brains just automatically rationalize that, well, they're getting better or they were worse back when because of what was happening in the environment. And for those patients who truly have endogenous illness, innate biological problems, conditions that need to be treated, especially, it's not true. But it's also not true for most of us that what we feel, and if you really examine what we're feeling and how intense it is and its nature, is provoked by the environment. That's determinism. You're saying to me that because this happened on the way to work, ergo I felt X, when another person who might have had that exact same path to work and that exact same experience would have had a completely different reaction. And so I have to remind people that what they're feeling is not because of the external environment. That external environment may provide triggers, but what they're feeling is because of their brain. It's because of the chemical environment in the brain. Especially with anxiety, I have to point out to people that they're beside themselves and they're having all these physical symptoms when they're untreated, let's say. And then they got a whole lot better once they started taking medication that increases serotonin, that is known to treat this. And a lot of times patients will say, well, but they'll rationalize and they'll say, well, I was also going through a lot back then. My work was I was really busy at work, they'll say. And I have to remind them that they have the same job now and that they have complained to me before about being busy or having a lot of stressors at work, and that really work did not change between now and then, or if we look at the timeline. And if they really stop and think about it, they have to admit, that's right, that's true. My stressors haven't changed, especially when they're talking about non-specific stressors. If they say, well, my mother had just died a week before, that's different. But if they say, well, yeah, but I was really busy at work, and and my wife, we were having some arguments and that sort of thing, those things, what they're giving me very vague stressors that are pretty much the status quo, that haven't changed, and that helps them a little bit understand, well, no, they are reacting to their environment. Sure, work gets busy. Sometimes it's busier than other times, and marriages go up and down. Relationships have their turmoil. But if you were having panic attacks then and you're not now, and you're taking medication now, it's probably almost certainly 99% or 98% more probable that it's due to the fact that you're taking the medicine than whatever external variable they're pointing to. And it's human nature. I am reacting to this, so this is what is causing. They ascribe a cause and effect relationship to these external variables, events, circumstances, people, what people say to them, what people do to them, and they forget that the final path, the final common pathway for all of that stimuli is themselves, their brain, their mind, and what they're going to do with it, what they're capable of doing with it, and what they do with it, and how we are manipulating that with either therapy or medication or a combination thereof. And that insight is often missing. Rationalization is a defense mechanism. It's an ego defense mechanism. And what it means, in the classic sense, in the Freudian sense, it's employed whenever the ego is threatened by an emotion. And so in order to deal with this emotion that's unacceptable is to rationalize it. It's one of the mature defense mechanisms, so at least it's in the best of the worst category. But it's very misleading, because what it means is it's using a truth or two and applying it to the situation in order to explain it. And what the explanation is true. All the facts that have been given are true, but they're irrelevant. They're irrelevant. So you get this rationalization about the environment, and all of it's true, but it has nothing to do with the fact. They'll give you a rationalization, and they won't even know that they're doing it, because they are largely, if not unconscious, these defense mechanisms. Freud said they were unconscious, but I also see preconscious and subliminally conscious. So especially rationalization. You kind of know you're doing it, but you buy into it. You believe your explanation. And you say, well, it's one of many explanations, and you give it the same credence as the real reason that things have changed. And usually there is one or two, basic reasons. But we tend to rationalize things. We tend to rationalize things after the fact a lot of times. And it's much easier for an objective third party, particularly one who's trained, to pick up a rationalization as it's happening in real time. But patients will do it. They will say, well, it's because of this, because all of these unrelated facts, and they seem related on the surface. There can be some very, very superficial, but when you get down to the core of it, even if all those things hadn't happened, weren't true, you would still have had this situation over here. And so the cause and effect over here, A and B, is still true, whether that stuff is true or not. So irrelevance, yeah, but really look at it. That's true. All that's true. Doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter. You're connecting two things that don't matter. And a red flag is doing it after the fact. When something happens that triggers a thought or an emotion that's unpleasant, that threatens the ego, then a person will engage in this. And they're doing it consciously. They're trying to explain it to themselves so that it's acceptable. And the real explanation, it might be benign. And then it's not so much a defense mechanism as simply something the brain does, something that the mind does, and the ego loves it because it makes sense. But it's wrong. It's wrong. And if it is something that's threatening and unacceptable, then it is more of a defense. If it's something really, really bad, like you don't want to believe that whatever. And in that case, it's more likely to be somewhat unconscious, where you really, it happens, if not as it's happening, immediately afterwards. And you tell it to yourself. But it also tends to take the form of a story. So it's especially evident when the person is telling it to their doctor or their therapist, which is why talking out loud in therapy is a good modality, because even if you think you have things figured out, you might be not lying to yourself, and sometimes hearing things out loud is the way that your clinician will be able to say, no, that's a rationalization, or you're minimizing, with that, or reaction formation. There's a whole set, and I talk about those in separate videos. Very, very fascinating.